Hello, one and all, and welcome to a metal, in quotation marks, version of Top Deck Fonts. Now, for this episode, we're actually going to talk about the upcoming set Kaldheim. What happened is, while technically spoiler season starts on the 7th, they actually decided to have a week of giving us a little sneak peek of the set being previewed by heavy metal bands. Now, in clarification, I never really listened to much heavy metal, so it was kind of nice to see kind of like the community who is into that brand of music kind of like getting excited seeing the previews and such. It's personally not my cup of tea, so it is still nice to see the excitement. Also, as well, it's also nice to see the excitement of those who are very well versed within the Nordic mythology and such, getting kind of like a kick out of the card designs and such that they showed off. So today, they pretty much what they showed off is they showed off a few cards of the set. They did show off one feature Planeswalker that's coming from the set, and they showed a couple of cards that are going to be in the set boosters, so to speak, as well as the feature commanders on the pre-made commander decks that are coming in Kaldheim. Now, specifically, we're going to talk about just the Kaldheim cards and the set booster cards. I'm not really going to delve into the commander stuff. While I do love playing the format and such, I feel like I really want to see the deck list of that. Plus, also, the factor is with one of them, they have a new mechanic that the Wizard of the Coast had not revealed just yet, technically foretold. Which, if people want my guess on what foretold is, I'm going to guess it's something related to an alternate casting cost where you have to exile cards on your hand to cast it. That's my logical guess. I am really going to be curious to see, but I'm pretty sure it's something going to be related to the whole exile cards from your hand shtick that one commander card, the blue-white one, was pretty much featuring. But for now, we're just going to focus on cards that are in the set or in the set boosters. So we're going to start off with actually a pretty dividing one, I would say. Sarulf Realm Eater. First of all, nice homage. It's 1 in Gagari, a 3/3 legendary creature wolf. Nice. Whenever a permanent, keyword permanent, that means either creatures, lands, planeswalkers, or enchantments, keep that in mind, an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on Sarulf Realm Eater. I probably am butchering that name, so I apologize in advance. At the beginning of your upkeep, if Sarulf has one or more +1/+1 counters on it, so keep in mind +1/+1 counters, so you can't be queued and put on a different counter on this card. Like, let's say you transferred from the Ozliv or something. No, you can't be cute with that. It has to be a +1/+1 counter. You may then remove all the counters. If you do, exile each other non-land permanent with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of counters removed this way. Specifically, the reason why they make it exile rather than destroy is because this doesn't become a constant source of board wipes. Because if it was like, oh, destroy all other permanents, yada yada yada, then this will constantly just get bigger and bigger, and then it's just board wipe after board wipe after board wipe. So there is a specific reason they did the exile clause there, for the record. As for the card itself, I feel like this is one of those cards that is on the border good, but it's not amazing. I feel like in Commander, there's definitely going to be some fun shenanigans you can do with this, especially since it's if you have a play group that plays a lot of fetch lands, Evolving Wilds, all the pretty much Zendikar fetch lands, etc., etc., then just getting this big is pretty easy. Plus, there's just a lot of tricks in Commander, like Edict effects and such, to make opponents sacrifice their permanents and such. So, you can definitely make this a pretty... I think I already seen like a little deck guides here and there of people actually brewing on this card, and there are some scary brews with this card in Commander. In Standard, though, which is my primary realm of the woods, I feel like there's two approaches you are going to go with this card. Either one, you have to kind of like go with a Gagari kind of like control deck of some sort, like pretty much have this one of your primary creatures, and then you just pretty much load up with board, kind of like a spot removal / board wipes type spells. In other words, your Heartless Axe, your Eliminates and such, maybe even Ram for you so you can make Sarulf lower attack creatures, because it is going to constantly buff itself up, so to speak. And then essentially what happens is then when you remove the counters, you can essentially then keep kind of like a board wipe shenanigans. It actually kind of has a cute synergy if you play cards like Garruk, and as long as you don't make the counters over sits, so to speak, like then you could just remove all those little woof tokens you create with the Garruk. I'm specifically talking about the Throne of Eldraine Garruk, for the record. I am having a brain fart, but it's the one that create woof tokens, and when the woof tokens die, it buffs itself. There's kind of like a cute synergy you can do with here, where if you need to do a board wipe, you can board wipe, eliminate the tokens, as long as it's not over sits, buff up Garruk, and then just do the ultimate, which is pretty nice. So you could definitely go that approach with it. The other approach that I think you want to keep in mind is you can actually go with a Jund style approach deck design with this, where you actually incorporate, of all things, land destruction. Because remember, it says whenever a permanent an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield. So yes, in our format, there's stuff like Fabled Passage, though I do think Fabled Passage is going to get a little less popular at the moment due to an upcoming cycle that's going to be coming that we're going to talk about in a minute. Well, with the exception in landfall strategies, but that's another story entirely. But you can kind of like go with Jund, kind of like land destruction deck, like there's Cleansing Wildfire and such. And if you have this on the battlefield and then just play kind of like your land destruction spells, your Field of Ruins, your Cleansing Wildfires and such, and your spot removal, you can get this big pretty quick. So that's definitely another approach. And I really think that's the approach. You kind of want to make a heavy control deck where this is one or at least one of the few creatures you put in the deck. Because if you really want to incorporate the board type removal that this card's going to play, you really don't want to build a board presence where your stuff is going to get exiled as well. Now, there is an argument you could probably put this in a Absent list, and then you can just have like a counter-based strategy, kind of like what Absent's been doing. But as many people pointed out, that's probably not the best idea in the world due to the factor that when you have to exile your stuff, when you remove counters from this, it mostly will exile all your counter synergy engine stuff, which is kind of a bit of a nombo. However, this is also just pretty good just in general in control-based decks. Either in the sideboard when you're going against like early game aggro specifically, maybe even mid-range, but that's a big maybe. Nevertheless, though, I do think the card is decent, and it's definitely going to be a fun Commander Brew round. In Standard, I'm going to keep my eye on it, but I don't think it's going to like make a major impact into Standard. But I could be wrong. A board like that on a creature is nothing to underestimate. I will say, though, the alternate spotlight art that they've been doing for this set is just so gorgeous. I mean, we haven't seen the whole set yet, but if this is kind of like the art style we are expecting to see from the alternate arts of the legendaries, which they have confirmed that all the legendary creatures are going to get this alternate art as a promo. Spot on. This is awesome. This is... I know it's cliche that I'm going to say this over and over again, but this is metal. This is so metal. Anyway, next card we're going to talk about is actually another very metal looking card, and actually our feature mechanic of how the gods are going to work within the set. Specifically, we got Halvar, God of Battle. 2 and 2 white for a legendary creature god. Creatures you control that are enchanted or equipped have double strike, and at the beginning of each combat, you may attach target or equipment attached to a creature you control to target creature you control. And it's also an MDFC, a modal face card, which then it can flip into, as we turn it over, it can turn into the Sword of the Realms. 1 in the white for a legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creatures get +2/+0 and have vigilance. And then whenever a equipped creature dies, return it to the owner's hand. So, basically the premise that they're going to have in this one is, 1, the gods can actually die, which every person who's into the Norse mythology has just been like, yes, pretty much with the flavor on that one, because the flavor is pretty spot on. I don't know much about Norse mythology, but I know enough that the basic shtick is the Norse gods can die, and a lot of people got a kick out of that. As for the card itself, the card's actually pretty decent. I'm not gonna lie. It's actually pretty good. Because the factor is, a format of 4/4 is not that amazing at first glance, but the factor is, if you consider this as an enchantment that's a creature, even though technically it's not an enchantment, but getting the effect of making your creatures that are enchanted or equipped having double strike, that's nothing to underestimate. We have a lot of powerful creatures in the format and a lot of powerful auras in the format, like Demonic Embrace is one I can think of right off the bat, just getting the +3/+3 and flying. do that and then be like, play that on turn 3 on like a Hallowed Blade or something like that, or a very evasive 2-drop creature, then play this on turn 4 and then just that's like, let's see, 3-1, so that's like 12 damage. That's gross. That's really gross. Like, there's in the aura decks, like the Glimmer of Geniuses, or Glimmer decks, essentially, the kind of like Boggle Tile style deck designs, they are going to love Halvar Guard of Battle. And the best part is, even if you don't need the enchantment part of this, or the quote unquote effects that this creature has, you can still just, or already have one on the battlefield. You could actually, it kind of breaks the legendary thing where the catch 22 when you try to put legendaries in your deck is if you have multiple copies and you have one copy on the battlefield, then one card's kind of dead in your hand. You don't really get that with this card since you have the choice of playing the equipment portion, which, one prediction I'm going to make in this video, I feel like this effect of whenever a creature dies, return it to the owner's hand, I think that's going to be something that's going to be on all of these quote-unquote God cards. Because I feel like that's going to be the shtick of how these cards are quote-unquote invulnerable, so to speak, while still keeping the Norse god dies favor, is technically while the one half can still die, if it's equipped with its quote-unquote weapon portion that is the other side of the card, then it will have that effect. And then it will have like a minor effect, such in this case, a crit creature gets +2 in Vigilance, which is definitely not bad, especially since we have auras in the format that, like that one where it's essentially when you attach it to a creature with Vigilance, it attacks with its toughness, which is pretty cute with this card. And also, just being able to use it as a semi-protection of your creatures against spot removal, not bad, especially if any of your creatures have powerful into the battlefield shenanigans. So, I actually really like this card. It's not like the most amazing card in the world, but I do think the Boggle style deck designs and standard are definitely going to give it a shot at the very least. Because it does have a lot of cute synergies. Nevertheless, it'll be fun to see kind of like all the god cards in the set and just see what they kind of do and such. So I am very, very, very curious on that. Next up, we're going to talk about the Planeswalker that they revealed so far. We're actually going to get 4 of them in the set, so this is going to be a lot. But that's probably going to be closer to the reveal season. Anyway, the one they showed off is Kaya the Inexorable. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong, right or wrong. Someone's going to tell me in the comments. Anyway, free, white and a black, Orzhov. Legendary creature, planeswalker, not creature, wow, brain fart. Legendary planeswalker Kaya, 5 loyalty, and it has these activated abilities. +1, put a ghost form counter on up to 1 target non-token creature. Keep in mind, this is a reminder counter. The counter itself doesn't give the ability, just for record. So you can't do cute shenanigans with the Ozliv. I thought about that at first, but no, you can't. But the creature does gain, whenever this creature dies or is put into exile, return to the owner's hand and create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. That's pretty good. It also has -3, exile target non-land permanent. That's really good. Oh, and it also has an ultimate of -7, where you get an emblem with, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a legendary spell from your hand, from your graveyard, or from among cards you own in exile without paying its mana cost. Okay. I had to think a little bit over this card, like when I saw this card at first, because I saw it right after I got done with work and such. And I had to think on it over the card drive, and I thought about it for the past few days, and I think the card is, with my final conclusion on it, I think the card is good. Like, it is going to be a very meta card. And the main reason why I would say that is just because, at its worst, it's a 5 mana, -3, exile target non-land permanent. That is utter in that just costs 1 more mana. And that is not bad. Now, the question is whether or not you play this over Elspeth Conquers Death. And I feel like you're going to play a split of this. You're either going to put 1 Kaya and then 2 Elspeth, or maybe 2/2 and such. Because I feel like Kaya is a very powerful card. Also, keep in mind, when people who are kind of arguing it's a 5 mana Planeswalker, are you sure about that? Remember, these are the colors where we have a lot of 4 mana board whites. We have Extinction Event, we have Shatter the Sky, we have even some free cost board wipes like the Witch's Curse and such. So, this card can be easily kind of protected in a sense. Like, you can cast a 4 board wipe, the opponent tries to build up their board space again. Oh, you play Kaya, exile the fiend they build up, and then you can start building up, and building up. Plus, the +1, while it's kind of the weakest component of the card, is legitimately not bad. Like, the factor is we have a lot of creatures that are also spells thanks to the adventure component. Granted, Orzhov adventures have not been that popular, but you definitely could go to like an absent adventure design and do this. So being able to like have an adventure creature on the battlefield, +1 on Kaya, put it on the creature. When the creature dies, you can just return it to your hand, get the spirit, but then you can cast the adventure portion of the spell. That's actually not bad at all. Like with stuff like, for example, if I recall how the ruling of this works, this actually works with stuff like Murderous Rider, where technically the die trigger, you can stack the die trigger to make it go to your hand first before it would quote unquote be shuffled into your library, so you can have constant Murderous Riders in your hand, which is pretty legit, not gonna lie. And then there's just stuff like even Giant Killer and such. Like, there's you can look at all the adventure stuff in Eldraine that are within the Orzhov, or even if you want to splash a third color range, and see kind of like the shenanigans you can do with that effect. Now, I will say one thing. I say the card is good. However, if there is a way to actually consistently get to the ultimate, which I am not sure, I'm going to say due to stuff like Questing Beast and a lot of Planeswalker removal that's already in the format, including Kaya herself, I feel like a lot of people are not going to get to the ultimate. But if there is a consistent way to get to the ultimate in the meta, then this card's going to be insane. Because that ultimate is nutty. It's one of those ultimates that you don't really understand it until you actually think about it. Because the thing is, you can have this at 7, ultimate it, and then during your next upkeep, recast Kaya again and have constantly an ability to essentially have an utter in, more or less. Especially if your opponent removes it. Oh, I'm going to recast Kaya again, have utter in, or even do the +1. And then there's just a lot of powerful legendaries, especially legendaries with ETBs, that being able to repeat over and over again would be kind of nutty. Like if you go into a Mardu-based strategy and you have Kroxa, which is a popular card, just having Kroxa in your graveyard, or even in exile, if someone exiles it, you can cast it from exile, and constantly have the ETB trigger of Kroxa on loop at upkeep without spending any mana, and that is just absurd. Lucky enough in Standard, I don't think there is a consistent way. Granted, this is us talking about not really seeing the whole set, so we really have to see the whole set before we can make that judgment. I will say, though, if there is a consistent way to get to the ultimate, this card is nuttier than half. This card would be a very meta-defining card. But as is, it's just a really good card that I think will see Standard play, especially in control-based deck designs. Plus, also, before I forget, the Borderless art, it's just Next up, we're going to talk about Realmwalker. 2 and a green for a creature shapeshifter, 2/3. It's a changeling. So changelings are back in Kaldheim, which is pretty cool. For those who don't know, who have never been in Lauren, basically the basic premise of changelings is they are creatures that are creatures of every type. Creatures have types like human, goblin, etc., etc., Loxodon, elephant, dog, cat. So this is everything. Keep that in mind. So this card is every creature type. And then it has, as it enters the battlefield, you can choose a creature type. And then you may look at the top card of your library anytime, and then you may cast creature spells of the chosen type from the top of your library. And this comes in 2 forms. The ones we're looking at is the buy a bots version that you get if you buy a bots of the set. There is also a regular version that is going to be in the set. As for the card itself, if a tribal deck can form within the kind of with green within their mana base, this card is then a really, really nutty card. Because one thing to keep in mind, this stacks. So let's say, for example, since this is a changeling, you play the first version of this, and you name, let's name something random like Warrior. Okay, you name Warrior. And then let's say then you have 3 more mana left, you look at the top card, oh, it's another Realmwalker. Well, since they're changeling, it's technically a Warrior, so you can cast that, and then stack the effect again, and then maybe you have another card type in your, creature type in your deck. Like, I don't know, maybe a Cleric or a Rogue. If people are not getting what I'm trying to hint at here, is I think this is actually a pretty sneaky good card in party-based deck designs that accommodate green within their deck design. There is also stuff like maybe Naya dogs or Naya cats and such might like this card a lot, just because the factor is it is either a cat or a dog, so it synergizes with both lords, which is really nice. Plus, also just the ability to just play cards on the top of your library. This is even going to be a really good goblin, because we've been trying to make a good goblin deck work in standard specifically. Yes, we know historic it's really nutty thanks to Mutzes and such, but in standard it's been a little tricky. So this card's actually pretty good in that. Now, on the other hand, this card is a 2 free for free, which the stats is not great, let me put it like that. You're mostly using this as a resource engine. And as a resource engine, it's a pretty good card, but it also can be a significant threat. At the very least, the lowest entry of this card is that it's just a free mana. You're going to play it, look at your top card, and then your opponent removes it before you play the card from top. But still, getting the card information is not bad, as we've seen from cards like Rada and Vivian Monsters Advocate. So, overall, I do think this card's really good. It has a pretty good chance in Standard if there is a tribal deck of sort. Nevertheless, if you're playing a tribal deck at EDH, this is going to be an all-star card in your deck, so pretty good. I say it's a pretty good card. Next up, probably one of my favorite cards they spoiled from the whole kind of like spoiler week thing. Magda, Brazen Outlaw. 1 in a red for a legendary creature, Dwarf Berserker. It's a 2-1, so you're getting good stats for a 2-drop. Other dwarfs you control get +1, +0. So to get +1 attack, that's nice. Whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, aka attacking, or through other methods that we're going to talk about in a quick second, you create a treasure token. And then it has an activated ability of sacrifice 5 treasures, search your library for an artifact or dragon card, put that card into the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Okay, the Jank Brew part of my brain loves this card. Like, oh dear, this is a really good card. Because here's the thing. Now, if we look at it at its base component, it's just a 2-mana 2-1 that is a lord. If you have other dwarfs in your deck, cool. And then when you attack with it, you generate a treasure. That is really cool. So just a 2-mana, being able to attack, generate a treasure, and then go from a 2-drop to essentially next turn being able to play a 4-drop. Or even maybe if you're playing this in a multicolored deck design, being able to filter a color to play another type of color permanent within your turn 3. Well, technically turn 4 or 5-ish, technically. Okay, unless you give this haste of some sort, since this doesn't have haste, so that is kind of a weakness now coming to think of it. But just being able to generate treasures from it is really nice. Plus, you don't also have to attack with it, and the other dwarfs that you have with it, since we have been confirmed that vehicles are actually going to be coming in Kaldheim, at least from the set theme boosters and such. So that's also another method of being able to tap down dwarves to be able to generate the treasures, which makes the janky brewer brain kind of like, brewing and being like, ooh, what silly shenanigans can I do to this? Can I get cheap out like a Terror of the Peaks? Can I cheap out like a Lithoform engine? Like, there's just a lot of ways, especially if we get any more powerful artifacts within Kaldheim. I am really excited to play around this card. Like, at its base, it's just a 2-mana 2-1 that when it attacks gets a treasure. Sure, that's also a lord, so you can play all your dwarfs that you have in Eldraine and the ones that are obviously coming in Kaldheim and make a dwarf tribal deck. Of course. But then the highest ceiling is there's just so much jank you can do, especially if you have additional ways to generate treasure and such. It's just, I am so excited to jank brew around this card. You have no idea. And of course, in EDH, if you play Dwarf Tribal, it's an auto include, or maybe even going to be brewing around this card as a commander. It's so good. It's so good. Plus, also, the alternate art is legit. As well, I even do really like the original art on it. Like, the original art is awesome as well. So, both of them, I don't mind pulling any of these because they're just, I love both arts, and I also just love the card design. It's just so cool. So cool. Anyway, now we're going to go from what cards that are essentially were spoiled that are in the set to now cards that are actually going to be in the set/theme boosters. So you can't pull these cards specifically within the Kaldheim main set. You have to open these in a set booster or a theme booster. Which does lead to the question of how you get these cards in Arena, but I did try to ask Daily Magic about that, and they pretty much said that we'll figure out on the 7th, so We'll figure out on the 7 how you acquire these, but still, they are going to be playable on Arena, so keep that in mind. Nevertheless, at least I believe. Well, we'll see. Nevertheless, it's still good to consider for constructed formats the goodness of these cards, such as Rampage of the Valkyries. 5 mana for an enchantment. When Rampage of the Valkyries enter the battlefield, create a 4/4 white angel token with flying and vigilance. Whenever an angel you control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. Okay. People who pulled Lisa from the Commander Legends are really, really, really happy that this card exists. I will say that. Especially if they go into an Angel Tribal, which that is definitely one thing that these set and theme boosters do help us see, that they're kind of like showing what themes we should expect in Kaldheim when it comes out. And the themes that we're seeing in Black and White is they're going to be the Angel deck, essentially. And overall, I say this card in Commander is going to be legit really, really good. Just being able to generate an Angel token, and then anytime whenever your Angels die, you're able to do an Edict effect. Granted, keep in mind, with Edict effects are very situational. The opponent's just going to make sure they sacrifice the least worried thing that they can sacrifice. But still, Edict effects are popular in Commander, so don't underestimate that. In Standard, I don't know. It depends on what Angel Tribal we have within the deck designs, because the Angels we have so far, we do have good Angels. Like, we have stuff like Baneslayer Angel and stuff like that. And even if you go into a life gain strategy, we do have the Cleric that generates Angel tokens, so that's nothing to underestimate as well. The problem I have with this card is just... usually the really good Edict effects are the ones you can flash in, and this one you can't really flash in. Granted, you do get a 4/4 Angel out of it, so it is technically, you're getting, what mostly is, you're getting a 1 mana discount on this type of effect, so to speak, and it also can stack itself, so if you play this in an Esper design, you can do stuff like Mirror Maid, copy this, generate another Angel token, or even in the Yorion-based deck designs, you can technically flicker this and generate an Angel, so there's definitely stuff to consider within that department, and if itself just, whenever that specific token dies, then you do the Edict effect, that could just be perfectly fine. However, there is a lot of popular enchantment removal that's being incorporated into the meta now, thanks to how Standard is at the moment. And I really feel like this is just going to be a card that is going to be played, and then it's going to be enchantment removed as Spell Conquer Staff, or even the new Kaya. So, I'm a little bit 50-50 on this in Standard, if I'm being honest. If Standard is slow enough, it's hard because it kind of has to do with balance. It either has to be kind of like a mid-rangey pace kind of a deck design, because if you go too slow, then this card is actually kind of really bad, because then what happens is opponents will just be able to remove it easily because the pace is slow enough that they can just wait to their Elspeth Conquer Staff or their enchantment removal. But if it's too fast, then it just gets too fast and you're not able to play this card before you die to aggro. So, the meta has to kind of like go into a medium pace. Like, you have to have kind of like a control, medium, kind of like mid-range deck, I would say, for this card to be very effective in Standard. It'll be interesting to see if it makes its impact, but I'm kind of leaning on no, and you're probably just going to craft your one-of for the play Angel, Tribal, and Brawl, if I'm being legit honest. Next up, a card that I am curious about. Gladewalker Literalist. 2 and a green for a free shapeshifter changeling, so it's a free mana, name every tribe you can think of. It has whenever another creature named this card enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Meh. It's really just meh. Now, there is going to be one application of this card, potentially, that we're going to be talking about once we talk about another card that is actually in Kaldheim that's probably spoiled down below and such. This card itself is just, it's fine. It's not great. It's not bad. It's just fine. Because a free mana, free, that's decent stats. Note, not good stats, it's decent stats. And the fact that it has this ETB trigger that whenever another one that has its same name, so if you play a second copy of it, then you'll be able to draw a card, that's perfectly fine. I don't think you should build a whole entire deck around this synergy. I'll say that. I think mostly you want to. How do I phrase this? I think it's one of those cards where I think you just want to brew more on the fact that it's a free mana, free changeling than actually the factor that you can get card draw from this. Like, maybe you could put this in the cat dog tribal deck because it's also a cat and a dog as well. And then if you do get a second copy of this on the battlefield, well, I think one thing that people are going to make the mistake of is try to play this in Winota. And while you can fetch this with Winota, since it's technically a human, due to the fact that it's also a human as well, thanks to the changeling archetype, it can't be used for the Winota triggers. So if you attack with this, it's not going to trigger Winota. So just one thing to keep in mind with changelings in general, I think that's going to be a first day brewer's mistake that everybody's going to make when they see changelings. They're going to be like, oh, I can play this in Winota, and since technically it is a non-human, I can actually attack with it and then get human out of it. That's awesome. No. It doesn't work like that. So let's just get that best case mentality out of our head, unless we get a really good changeling that we don't mind is technically a human that we want to fetch with Winota. Just for the record. That being said, if you need a free mana, any creature type to fill your tribal deck, it's a decent curve builder. That's all I'm going to say about the card. With one weird application that we'll talk about in a minute. Next up, Elvish Ambush. Free and a green for an instant, create a 1/1 green elf creature token for each elf you control. This one is, in theory, good, but it could also be bad. It really depends on kind of like the curve of the elf decks that we get in the format, since technically Kaldheim is going to bring us elves. I feel like this is more going to be a good commander card because commander elves might like this card a lot. Just a 4 mana instant, just at the end of your opponent's turn, generate up to 1 to like, I don't know, like a bajillion elves. That's pretty good. That is pretty good for what that archetype wants to do. In standard, really, I can't really judge it yet until we see kind of like the curve that the elves decks are going to do. I think we have like a few elves in standard at the moment, like Rada and such, but we don't really have enough to have like a turn 1 elf play, turn 2 elf play, turn 3 elf play, then turn 4 play this, and then generate a few elves. Really, the main component of this card you have to ask yourself is a 4 mana create, let's just say about 2 elves, maybe even 1, good? And the answer I'm going to say is, at least if we're talking about standard, I think the answer is no. I could be wrong. Maybe there could be a deck that does have, like, be able to produce multiple elves. Like, if we have any, like, cheap elf generation and such, that can be early curve, and then you can play this at the end of the opponent's turn to generate a bunch of elves, then the card gets a lot better. But at the moment, at least from what we've seen so far, I'll get back with this card once the whole set's revealed to determine my final 2 cents on it, maybe through Twitter or such, or maybe on the video if it becomes a sleeper card. But at the moment, I really don't think the card is great, with the exception in Commander and the Elves deck. In Standard, we just have to wait and see. Next up, a card that... Okay, let's talk about it. Gilded Assault card. 1 red and a red for a 5/1 artifact vehicle with trample. Crew tool. So you can essentially tap a 2 power or 2 1/1s to essentially crew it, aka make it into an artifact creature. And it also has the ability to sacrifice 2 treasures, return Gilded Assault card from graveyard to your hand. I see so many people overhyping this card, saying that this card is really, really good. And I am going to be legit honest. I don't see it. I don't see it at all. Okay, yes, in aggro decks, they do like their really good trample creatures, don't get me wrong. And this is a pretty decent trample creature that has the ability of recursion if you sacrifice treasures to return it back to your hand. That's nice. However, 2 things. I think a lot of people kind of got into the best case mentality with this card because they're looking at Magda and just being like, oh, you can be aggressive with Magda, generate the treasure tokens, play this, and then be able to be aggressive with it. And then if somebody removes it, or you can just get the kind of like ball elemental effect of it, just cast it, attack it, it will die, obviously, because someone's going to try to block it. But then you can sacrifice your treasures and then just return it to your hand. That's awesome. No, it's not. No, it's not. Especially if you're playing this in an aggro deck. Because here's the thing. Most aggressive decks want to play cards that can either A, be a significant threat on the battlefield when it's there. Like, we're talking stuff like A-Nats, we're talking stuff like pretty much cutting, well, like the pretty much 2-drop Rogue. We're even talking about stuff like if you go into a mid-range strategy like Terror of the Peaks, which, granted, I will say one argument with this card. In a Terror of Peaks style deck, it's kind of cute, especially in the Magda type strategy, because being able to play this. Well, no, that doesn't even work, because if you play this, it's still an artifact. So, I mean, the only cutest strategy I could think of this card is I think this is a cute card to Thaleen, or it could just be a cute vehicle that you can crew if you want to do it in the elf deck to be able to generate treasures with Magda. There's that. But honestly, I think this card's a little overhyped. I think this card is not that good. Because the 1 toughness is what kills this card. Especially since we have a lot of cheap removal in the format. A lot of good artifact removal, plus also just a lot of cheap. Like the minute you crew this and people are like, oh, I'm just going to eliminate it. Yeah, or Heartless Act it. Or Shock it. Or Ram through. Which, okay, granted, if you go into Gruul with this, being able to crew this and then cast Ram through on this to ram a creature the opponent has is kind of cute. I am not gonna lie. That's actually really cute, kind of like from a flavor kind of perspective. But overall, I think this card is overhyped. I think this card is actually pretty bad. But I could be wrong. Next up, Fire Giant's Fury. 1 in a red for a sorcery, and has target giant you control gets +2/+2 and gains trample until in a turn. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player this turn, exile that many cards from top of your library. Until end of your next turn, you may play those cards. Maybe. I am going to legitimately say maybe on this card. This one is where I'm 50-50, because here's the thing. That effect is pretty absurd, and we still have the most popular giant in the format, which is Bonecrusher Giant, which just being able to just play that on turn 3, then next turn, if you don't mind dealing 2 damage to yourself, making it a 6/5 with Trample, and then being able to, when you deal the excess damage, be semi-card draw. That is ridiculously absurd, and you don't mind paying the 2 life to do that effect. So, that, as a sorcery speed spell, really, really good. If you also go into a giant tribal deck design and such, which you can go into the Gruul, or I think the Izzet is what they're encouraging with their deck design here, at least from what we've been seeing from the sets and such. If you go into an Izzet based deck design or a Gruul based deck design, it's just kind of like a cute card. I'm going to keep my eye on this card because I do think the card is actually pretty legit. Because the factor is, you do the damage, you get the semi-exile impulse card draw. That's nothing to underestimate, especially in an aggro-based deck design. Like, being able to exile, like, say, an Embercleave and such, that's really good. And being able to attack with the Embercleave and try to get to the Embercleave effect, really nice. Or maybe even another Fire Giant's Fury and such, and just do it all over again. The impulse draw on this card is what makes it really, really good. Now, granted, it is impulse draw, so you got to keep that in mind. And yes, it does have the effect that until the end of your next turn, which is nice. But the problem is, it is kind of foreshadowing to your opponent what you're going to try to do next turn, in theory, so you got to keep that in mind. I think this card is secretly really good. Especially with Bonecrusher Giant in the format. Now, once that rotates out from Eldraine, that's another story entirely. We'll have to wait and see. But overall, I think this card is legit good. This card is really, really good. Plus, also, if you do a Realmcloak Giant and then do this effect and just do a 9/9 tramp, oh, that's just gross. That's just really gross. So yeah, I think card, really good. Next up, Bearded Axe. 2 in a red for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each dwarf equipment and or vehicle you control. Equip 2. Are you playing a equipment based slash also heavy vehicle dwarf deck? You might give this card a shot. or maybe even a heavy equipment deck, you might give this a shot. But you definitely have to be in those tribal decks to actually synergize really well with this card. Granted, it does give itself a +1/+1 effect if it's the only quote unquote any of those things on the battlefield, which is not great, so you really have to be in a dwarf artifact deck for this to work. Or maybe even in the warrior equipment deck and such for this to work. Or maybe in a heavy vehicle deck. If that deck does not exist, then this card is really, really bad. Though I will say, if there is a way to make this card good, is if we do get a heavy equipment deck and we could run stuff like the Fervent Champion to be able to quickly equip this on it, that's actually pretty nuts. So, keep an eye on it. I'm curious about it, but I'm not sure about it. Next up, 4 Mantle Striker. 4 and a black for a 4/3 elf rogue. So it's an elf and a rogue, keep that in mind. Then when it enters the battlefield, you choose one. Remove X counters from target permanent, where X is the number of elves you control. Or target creature an opponent controls get -X until end of turn, where X is the number of elves you control. I think in Limited this is going to be a pretty good card, especially if you can go into the Black-Green Elves deck. In Constructed, I mean, it is cute that you can actually kill Planeswalkers with this card because the counters can be any type of counters on it, which is actually pretty cute. So you can essentially remove Planeswalker counters from it, and if you're in an Elf Tribal deck, you go wide with your Elves. The opponent plays an opposing Planeswalker, like let's say a Kaya, or maybe even like a Shanra or such. You play this, you remove the counters from it, destroy the Planeswalker. That's really, really cute. And then also, this is just a decent creature removal spell. The only con with the card is, I do think the card costs too much. Like, if you're going to play this in your deck, I think you only play it as a 1 or 2 of. But even then, I don't know. I like the effects, don't get me wrong, the ETB effects are really powerful. And maybe you put this in like a Reanimator deck? Maybe Reanimator Elves? Maybe? I don't know. This is a card where, like I said, the meta has to be really, really slow for this card to be effective. If it's not slow whatsoever, then this card is just bad. But I do like the card. I'm going to say that. I do like it. Next up, Renegade Reaper. There we go. 2 and a black for a 2/3 Angel Berserker with flying. And then whenever it enters the battlefield, mill 4 cards. If at least one Angel card is milled this way, you gain 4 life. If a black-white Angel deck exists, this is actually a pretty decent card, especially if it has a Reanimator-based package. Because, one, it kind of does the same thing that essentially, like, the zombie from Pharaohs does, the 2-drop zombie merfolk. You're mostly using this for 2 things. You're using this for board presence things, because a 3-mana 2/3 flyer is not bad. And then just being able to mill the cards so you can fill up your graveyard if you want to do, like, a Reanimator-based strategy. And if you mill an Angel, gaining 4 life is actually pretty legit. So, overall, I think the card is fine, but it needs to find a deck that it wants to be in. If it doesn't find a deck it wants to be in, then the card is just decent curve filler that can be used for reanimation style deck designs. Next up, Elderfane Ritualist. 2 and a black for a 3/1 Elf Cleric, and then when it dies, return another target Elf card from your graveyard to your hand. I think this one is on border on being pretty good, if I'm being honest. It's one of those cards where it depends on kind of like how the black-green elf deck goes within its design. But a 3-mana 3/1, not great stats, but just being able to have the die trigger effect on this is actually pretty nice, especially if you have, like, let's say you're trying to build an aggressive elf deck, and essentially you build your early game elves and such, they get removed by spot removal, since we have popular spot removal early game in the format. You then play this, the opponent will then try to remove it, and then when it dies, you then get the return trigger to return an elf, and it really is dependent on the early game curve of the elves deck. If there's like really powerful 1 or 2 drops and you don't mind playing late game, then this card is actually really, really good. If there isn't, and the elf deck is more just a go wide, play a bunch of small stuff, and then just go full, then I think this card is just a little bit slow. But I think the card is decent. I think the card is legit decent. Next up, probably one of my second... Okay, let me make sure it loads. It's... Oh, there we go. Giant's Grasp. This is another card where I'm like... This is probably my second favorite of the bunch that they show that are in the set boosters. 4 mana for an enchantment aura, you enchant a giant you control. And when you do, when it enters the battlefield, gain control of target non-land permanent for as long as Giant Grasp remains on the battlefield. That's a 4 mana mind control. That is really, really good. I can't underrate how good this card is. A 4 mana mind control effect is nothing to underrate. Now, granted, this one is very situational. You have to have a giant on the battlefield. You have to make sure you attach it to the giant, and make sure the giant doesn't get spot removal. And then once that happens, then you control the permanent. So that is very situational. Still, then I still think the card's really good. Just a 4 mana mind control effect, especially if you control, like, maybe you control a Planeswalker and do the ultimate, or just do an effect that is beneficial to your deck design. Or steal the most opposing threat temporary. That's not bad either. Just, especially if you have ways to protect your giants, then this card just gets really good, because then you can play stuff like Mirror Maid, and then copy Giant's Grasp, gain control of another opponent, permanent, non-land permanent that the opponent's control. Now, I will say one counter to this strategy is there is stuff like a Shia in the format, which makes all opponents like creatures into forests, technically, so that then negates this card, so you gotta keep that in mind. But overall, I'm not gonna lie, I actually really like this card. Especially if we get any really, really, really good giants other than the ones that we have in Eldraine, I think this card might actually be a really sneakily good card in the meta. We have to wait and see. Mostly the other way to look at the card too, even though you steal temporarily. There is also sagas that are coming in standard as well as the sagas that we have currently in standard. So being able to at least steal a saga temporarily to do like the ultimate or something, or like make sure that it doesn't ultimate on the opponent's turn, that's also a nice temple play to actually keep in mind with the card. So I'm just gonna be honest, I actually legit like this card. I think this card will actually see some standard play. I'm not gonna lie. Also, if you go into an Esper based giant deck design, if you can, being able to play that 5 mana Pharaoh spell where you return a target aura and a target creature from the battlefield, so then you can actually return a giant from the battlefield and then return Giant's Grasp. It's just. That is just a fun, janky combo of the day. If somebody does that in standard, you're welcome. Now, probably my favorite card they revealed so far because it has a lot of jank potential. Absorb Identity. Probably Unsummoned Skull's favorite card of the whole reveal, if I'm being honest. 1 in the blue. Instant spell, return target creature to its owner's hand. You may have shapeshifters you control become copies of that creature until end of turn. That is a really cool effect. Like, just being able to, as stated before, we're getting a lot of changelings in the, probably coming from Kaldheim and such, at least from what we've seen so far being spoiled. And the thing is, all changelings are shapeshifters. That is their regular quote-unquote creature subtype, other than the changeling little errata on there, where it's like it's also all creature types as well. So being able to actually just bounce something if you have like 1 or 2 shapeshifters on the battlefield and make them into something significant, like let's say your opponent plays like let's say a Baneslayer Angel. They play a Baneslayer Angel, and you have like 2 shapeshifters on the battlefield. Being able to, when the opponent casts that, and then at the end of their turn, play Absorb Identity, bounce a Baneslayer Angel, and then on your turn, get 2 Baneslayer Angels that you can attack during that turn. That is legit nutty. I can't underestimate that. That is a really nutty thing you could do. Really, it's going to be dependent on if Shapeshifter Tribal can be a thing. But if it can be a thing, I think this card is going to be a sneaky all-star card in the deck. I like this card a lot, maybe more than I should, but the card is actually legit kind of hilarious, and actually I think pretty good. Don't underrate the card. Next up, we got Youthful Valkyrie. I'm going to butcher this. Youthful Valkyrie. 1 and a white for 1/3 angel with flying, and it has whenever another angel enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Overall, if the Angel Tribal deck exists, they're going to like this card. It's a 2 mana 1/3, which helps block against aggressive deck designs. And the fact that if you can play like a turn 2 Angel and then a turn 3 Angel, and then this becomes then a 2 mana 2/4, etc., etc. You can even be cute and maybe put this in absent counters where it has both kind of like a counter synergy and an Angel synergy, where you can play like the Cleric that essentially, Centaur Cleric, that whenever a counter is put on something, it puts an additional counter on it, so then you can have those out and put 2 counters on this. Like, there's some really cute synergies you can do with this card. Now, whether or not it's going to be constructed viable, it really depends on the angels that we get in standard with Kaldheim, because the angels we currently have are not bad, they're just not great. Not bad, not great. So, really, it's dependent on if we get some really good standard viable angels. If we do, besides Baneslayer Angel, of course, if we get a lot more angels that can fill the curve of the free drop, 4 drop, etc., etc., then this card actually becomes legit pretty good. But even then, maybe if we do get. I'll actually talk about this card actually next before we talk about the previous card. There is also, if we get a bunch of good 4, 5 drop angels, then maybe that would be perfectly fine since we have stuff like this Starheim Aspirant. 2 and a white for a 2/2, which is not great, but angel spells you cast cost 2 less to cast, which is absurd. That's actually a pretty absurd ability. Like, being able to play this on turn 3, and then next turn being able to play a Baneslayer, and, like, you can even do, like, the most absurd thing you can actually do when you think about it. You play this on turn 3. If it doesn't get removed, you can play Youthful Factory and Baneslayer Angel on the same turn. Can you? Yeah, you can, because technically Baneslayer Angel goes down to 3. Yeah, you can, especially if you have a land. Oh man, that's absurd. So yeah, especially if we get any good angels, this might actually just be an auto-include in angel travel decks, just because the mana reduction is nothing to underestimate. So yeah, Starnheim Aspirant, pretty good. I think this card will see standard play if angel travel can be a thing. Plus, also, one thing to keep in mind, this also affects changelings, so because changelings are technically angels, so keep that in mind as well. Next up, we got War Chanter Scald. 2 and a white for a 2/3 Dwarf Kralik. Whenever this becomes tapped, if it's enchanted or equipped, create a 2/1 red Dwarf Berserker creature token. I think it's fine because it is kind of one of those cards that I think if you go into the kind of like aura equipment kind of like deck, because keep in mind you have to go into the equipment deck for this to work. Like you have to be able to equip this pretty easily and then be able to attack with it. Though granted, we do got some really good equipment like Child Spear, and we're probably gonna get some a lot better equipments like we have seen from Kaldheim, like the NDC God equipment card. So if we get that, then this might just be a decent free drop in general. It's just hard because it's a cleric. If this was a dwarf warrior, then I would say absolutely no sweat about it. But since it's a cleric, I mean, I guess the cute thing can do with this card that it can actually go into the kind of like warrior Nahiri equipment deck if you want to do some party based synergies and such. Maybe going into the party deck, especially if you have an equipment based synergy within the deck design. And there are equipment that can be cutely put on this. Like the one I can think of right off the bat is technically like that one from Eldraine that costs 1 green mana to play, and then you just automatically attach it to a target non-human creature, but the equipment cost is absurd. Being able to play this on turn 3 and then next turn do that, and then give it a significant stat boost, and then be able to attack in, and then get the 2/1 red dwarf berserker creature token, which is a good ability if you can trigger that. That's actually really nice. So it has a chance, but I'm not sure about it. I think if anything, it has to either go into a really good equipment deck that has maybe party-based synergies, or it's just going to be some good quality jank. And don't get me wrong, I love some good quality jank, so I'll definitely try to jank brew around this if I can on Arena. Next up, a card that is not a jank brew card, because I think this also has some really good historic applications. Armed and Armored, 1 and a white for an instant. Vehicles you control become artifact creatures until end of turn. Okay. Oh, and then you can choose a dwarf you control and attach any number of equipment you control to it. What? What? Okay, let me explain why this card is ridiculously absurd in Historic. Because due to the fact that we have Kaladesh in the format in Historic, we have a lot of good vehicles, we have even a lot of good dwarfs that were introduced for Kaladesh. So just being able to go into kind of like the red white vehicles deck that has a lot of dwarves and such, and then being able to cast this at the end of your turn to just say put some very powerful equipment on a specific dwarf, like I don't know, maybe on Depola, giving her a Colossus Hammer. Like you could do stupid synergies like that. Plus, also this can crew Sky Sovereign and such, and being able to just attack with that without having to pay the crew costs. That's absurd. There's also Heart of Kirin. There's Aether. There's just the Aether, like the free drop one vehicle and such. And even if you go into formats like Pioneer, where we have, I can't remember, did Smuggler Copter got banned in Pioneer? I think it did. If it didn't, though, then I would say this card is absurd in Pioneer. But nevertheless, there's still a lot of decent and good vehicles that this effect is pretty absurd. Now, granted, the fact that it is instant makes it one of those things where if you want to take advantage more of the first part, you might probably want to cast it at the beginning of your turn. Especially if the creatures, especially if the artifact's creature or quote unquote vehicle has been on the battlefield, so it doesn't have the summoning sickness issue. But this could also just be a really good combat trick at the end of an opponent's turn or during combat and such, where the opponent doesn't think you're going to attack with that vehicle or block with it because you don't have the proper cooling. Bam, you play this, do all those effects, build up your board state for next turn, and just do some really good effects. I think this card is, out of all the cards that have been shown from essentially the set boosters and such, I think if we get a lot of good vehicles and dwarfs and such, this is probably the most standard playable of the bunch. In other words, I think you're going to see this card a lot, is what I'm implying. Especially in Historic. In Historic, you're going to see this card more than you probably care to. Let me put it like that. Next up, Canopy Tactician. Free and a green for a Elf Warrior. So if you're playing Party, cool. It's a free, other elves you control get +1/+1, and you can tap it for free green mana. Commander, absolutely if you're playing Elf Tribal. Standard, I mean, you could definitely try the Elf Party deck out, which this might be the cutest card to put in an Elf Party deck and such, because it's a mana dork that also acts as a warrior. But we have stuff like Rada that can kind of do that effect if you're going into Gruul parties and such, so, I mean, I guess redundancy and such. I feel like it might be too slow for Standard, potentially, but in Commander, absolutely. And I think you still want to craft at least one of these in Arena just for Brawl. But as for constructability and Standard and like ranking and such, honestly, I think it's a little slow. Though, I will say one exception to this. There is the factor that this can help you significantly ramp into stuff like the Great Hinge. Like this by itself, if you just play this by itself on 4, you can definitely, if it doesn't get removed, be able to play the Great Hinge next turn. So, don't underrate that ability of the card. I'm just going to say that right off the bat. Next up, Surtland Fleener. 5 mana for a Giant Berserker, 4/6, and whenever this attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, this creature deals damage equal to sacrifice creature's power to any target. If sacrifice creature was a giant, it deals twice that much damage instead. There's definitely going to be a lot of janky brewing around this card that I will try, but I think the card's bad. Because the thing is, this is kind of like one of those cards that you want to more use it as a finisher than actually as a card that play and then you have to wait a turn before you can attack with it and get the effect. And that's also going to be dependent if you have another creature on the battlefield, and if you want to get the effect of a giant. Giants are really heavy costing. Granted, you can be cute with this card and do stuff like, say, have a Bone Crusher Giant out and being able to deal 8 damage to the opponent if you sacrifice your Bone Crusher Giant. Not bad. Don't get me wrong, that's not bad. I don't know. I think this card is too slow, potentially. I think in casual kitchen table magic or in Brawl, it'll be a blast. But in constructed, like rank and standard competitive, no, unless you go into like a Perforos deck design, if I'm being honest. In Perforos, this card becomes kind of decent. Without Perforos, this card is pretty bad. Next up, Cleaven Reaper. 3 and 2 black for 5 free creature Angel Berserker. It has flying, it has trample, and you can pay free life to return this from your graveyard to your hand. Keyword hand. And you can only activate this ability only if you have an Angel or Berserker into the battlefield under your control this turn. I'm going to keep my eye on this. I want to say it's bad, but it is a recursive threat in a sense. A 5 mana 5 free flying trample is nothing to underrate. That's actually a pretty decently static creature. Not a great static creature, but a decently static creature. And you can use it to be aggressive. So in like a control style deck that maybe has angels or berserkers within their deck design, Just being able to play this and then try to attack with it, and if it gets removed, then being able to the next time you play another angel. Because we have that one angel that came from Zendikar Rising, the Angel Warrior, that you can essentially play from your sideboard or get one from your sideboard and such. So I feel like you want to play it in that type of deck design where you play this, if it gets removed, then you can play your Angel Warrior, and then you don't mind because you can just fetch one from the sideboard and such, and then be able to replay Cleave Reaper, go on the aggressive and such in the kind of like a long game and such. I feel like that's the approach you want to do with this deck design. By the way, one thing for standard, if you want to regarding the crafting and such, if the black white angel deck exists, you might want to consider crafting that 4-drop angel from Zendikar Rising, the Angel Warrior that you can fetch from your sideboard, because that might actually be a pretty good mainstay in these type of deck designs. I'll just say that right off the bat. Overall, the card is fine. I will say if there's one top quality of the card, that art is amazing. Victor Adam Miguez, you did really good on this art. Next up, a card that I'm just going to say, nope. Certain Elementus. 7 mana, 8/8. As an additional cost to cast this spell, reveal a giant card from your hand or pay 2 mana. No. No. Okay, don't get me wrong. It does have a cool effect that when it attacks, you may cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand without paying its mana cost. That's cool. Don't get me wrong. This is a cool card. However, the card's just too high statted. Because you have to be in the giant deck for this to work. Because 7 mana is a lot. Now, granted, there is that 5-cost giant from Pharaohs that discounts your spells that are higher by 1 mana, so you can cast this for 6 mana as long as you have a giant in your hand. So, that could be perfectly fine. However, this is a very slow card because you have to cast it, it's late game, and you have to wait to attack with it to get the effect. And don't get me wrong, we have a lot of powerful sorcery spells in the meta. Remember, we have all the ultimatums in the format. So being able to use Certain Elementus to actually be able to cast one of those for free is nothing to underestimate. However, there is a lot of good late game removal in the format as well as board wipes that I think this card is just... it's just too slow. Like, if I want this effect, I need to have it on a 4-drop or 5-drop even. And even then, the ones that we had in the format before did not see much competitive play. Keep that in mind. So, I mean, if this actually sees play and actually in a top Grand Prix, like a deck that actually wins a tournament, I will eat my own words. But I highly doubt it. I like the art, I like the effect in casual kitchen table magic, but in standard, no. Maybe in Brawl, but no. No. It's just too slow. Next up, Valkyrie Harbinger. 6 mana for a 4/5 flying lifelink at the beginning of each end step. If you gain 4 more life this turn, create an angel creature token with flying and vigilance. In the Orzhov life gain deck, this actually has a pretty good chance because mostly they do gain about that much life each turn, and being able to create an angel token is really nice. Also, this is pretty nutty in Historic, where we have that 1/2 drop that whenever an angel enters the battlefield, you automatically gain 4 life, so that's pretty sweet with this card. Overall, I think the card's actually decent in Historic. In Standard, we have to wait and see. There are definitely ways to gain 4 life consistently in the format, so this might just be a decent top-end card for a casual deck. In more competitively grind-oriented deck designs, probably not, but I'll keep an eye on it. Mostly because the only reason why I'm saying this is because we still have that free drop that discounts angels by 2, so technically this can be a 4-drop, so you gotta keep that in mind. Next up, the last cards that are actually coming from main Kaldheim. This one is going to be a bit of a weird one to talk about. Pyre of Heroes, a 2-drop artifact that has the ability, note it's not legendary, so you can have multiple copies of this, keep that in mind. It has an activate ability of 2 and tapping it to sacrifice a creature. You search a library for a creature card that shares a creature type with sacrifice creature and has converted mana cost equal to 1 plus that creature's converted mana cost. So it's essentially you're looking for a free drop if you sacrifice a 2-drop, etc. And then you put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library, activate this ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. Maybe. I'm going to say that right off the bat with this card. And I know I've been sounding like a broken record player with that statement. Here's the thing. The card is not bad. Because the fact is, if you're in a tribal deck, being able to search for like a very powerful on curve drop next turn just by paying 2 mana and sacrificing your 2 drop to get like a powerful giant. Or, well, giant's probably the bad example. Let's say we have a 2 mana changeling. Let's put an example like that. Because we know changelings are coming into the format, which is perfect for this. So let's say we have a 2 mana changeling. Then you have Pyre of Heroes out, and then next turn you sacrifice the changeling with the effect and get like a Yorvold or something, or a really good free cost spell of a tribal type that you might be playing within your deck design, like maybe a giant or something like that. That's where I think the card's really good. The fact that we know that changelings are coming into the meta makes this card actually a lot more better, especially if you have some really good playable changelings in the format. If we get some really, really good changelings, then I think this card is actually pretty good. However, I do also think this could be the secret sauce to a party deck, potentially, because the factor is you can actually use this to, like, let's say you play an early game party member that if you play another party member of the same type, but you need to search for a different party member, as long as they're like the same subtype, like let's say you made a human party deck, for example, you being able to sacrifice that one to get another human that's maybe of a different party member and such, and just like stuff like that. Or even like on turn free, you play like a turn free human, and then maybe you play it in kind of like a non-human tribal deck as well, because then you could fetch Winota and such. Like, these breeding pool type of effects are nothing to underrate, especially since this is not legendary, so you can have multiple copies of this on the battlefield. That's also nothing else to underrate. So, I feel like in a combo deck of sorts, if a combo deck exists, they're going to like this card. However, this card is slow. This card is a really, really slow card. It's very situational depending on if you get the proper tribal deck in order, if you have the proper changelings. And if those don't cross the streams, so to speak, then the card is probably going to be pretty bad. However, in Commander, a lot of tribal decks are going to be looking at this card because, yeah, just being able to get an on-curve creature of a specific type that could affect the game, especially in EDH where you have a 100-card deck to be able to tutor out a specific card, really good. In Standard, we gotta have to wait and see. I want to say it might be good, but I'm not sure. Then last but not least, we actually are now going to get the rest of the Pathway cycle, which for those who have not played in Zendikar, the Pathways are modal phase cards that are essentially 2 different land types. So for example, like with this one, Bark Channel Pathway, if you play it on this side, you get a forest, essentially, well, technically a land that's a non-forest, but it can tap for forest mana. Or you can play Tile Channel Pathway. You have a choice of whenever you play the card to play the front or back side. And in this one, you can just tap for an island and such. And we're finally going to get the completed cycle of this. So we're going to get the Simic, we're going to get the Rakdos, we're going to get the Azorius, we're going to get the Gagari version of these cards, and finally able to complete the cycle. Also, there is one more card we're going to talk about in a minute, but let's first just talk about this in general. I feel like the meta is going to be a significant change with the fact that we have the Pathway cycle finally completed. Because I think that's going to make a lot of different colored deck designs that struggled at the moment going to prosper very well. Like, let's say in the 2 colored deck designs that are wanting these type of pathways, the Azorius type decks, Kagari decks, and such, they're going to love these cards. The fact that they can now make their mana more consistent, nothing to underrate. But I feel like where this is going to be very relevant is mostly within the free colored deck designs. Specifically free. Because, like, you can play Mardu, Jun, name any shard, name any cons, and now you have essentially a full kind of like pathway cycle to be able to play those free colored deck designs. That's nothing to underrate. But keep in mind, if people do go that route, remember there is that land destruction thing I was talking about really earlier, and that might actually be a lot more popular now, since I think a lot of people are going to try to play all the pathways that they can and such, maybe play less basics. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. But nevertheless, I do think these cards, they're obviously really good. Like, we've seen Pathways, they've been really good cards in the meta. The fact that we got the full cycle completed is great, so it allows us to be able to make our mana base a lot more consistent. It'll be kind of interesting to see if mini decks go into the 3, the 4, to maybe even 5 colored design patterns. Just, it opens up those pathways and such. Well, I actually did not intend the pun there, but I will take credit for that pun. But it does open up the path for just more multicolored deck designs and just seeing how they do. Plus, also maybe more better integration of using the land destruction spells, especially if people get really, really greedy with their mana bases. So keep that in mind. And the last card that I almost forgot that they did reveal, because it's actually kind of made sense when you think about it, sagas are returning in Kaldheim, which actually kind of makes sense when you actually look at the dictionary definition of saga. But nevertheless, the one that they showed off today, or not today, the one they showed off this week is Showdown of the Skalds. 2 red and a white for a saga. So this is our first golden saga, or multicolored saga we've seen, so that's kind of cool. Anyway, it has this steps on the saga. Step 1. X out the top 4 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. That's really, really good. Don't underrate that. And then it has step 2 and 3. Whenever you cast a spell this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Now this card is really, really good. Now, on one hand, it's kind of like one of those weird cards, because many people are probably looking at this and being like, in aggro decks, they're making the aggro deck argument where it's like, well, most 4-drops, they want to make sure it's an aggressive play and such, and just make sure you have an aggressive creature and such. And this card is a little bit too slow for that. I understand that argument, don't get me wrong, but here's the thing. You don't play this as a 4-drop. You still play your aggressive 4-drop, and then if your aggro game needs to go into the mid-range, then that's when you play Showdown cards, because then your hand is a little bit empty. Oh, hey, boom, you impulse 4 cards. Oh, by the way, when you're able to rebuild your board state, then when you ever do that, you can either put counters on creatures you already have on the battlefield and make them a lot more aggressive oriented and such. I think a lot of people are underrating step 2 and step 3 on this, because being able to make what once your aggressive board state into a bigger threat, especially if you can cast multiple spells, because it's whenever you cast a spell, and since a majority of aggressive oriented deck designs like to keep cheap spells, essentially, being able to, like, let's say, for example, you play this, you have, like, maybe a 2-drop on the battlefield already, and such. So, you play this, and then you exile, like, 2 shocks, 1 creature and such. Being able to then, next turn, play the creature, shock, and then just be able to put free counters distributed wherever you want on creatures, that is nothing to underrate, especially within an aggressive deck design. This is also really good in a mid-range deck design, especially in Naya Counters. Naya Counters is going to love this card. Yeah, this card is... I would be dumbfounded if this card doesn't see play. Plus, also there's Yorion, so you gotta keep in mind, Yorion also loves this card as well. So, yeah. I think this card is really, really good. It's a good first saga to show off, because I think it's going to see a lot of standard play. So, yeah. And that's all the cards they have revealed from Kaldheim so far. We are going to technically get one on Christmas Eve, but I'll wait till like we start official spoiler seasons before we add that card. Unless it's like if it's a significant meta changer card or maybe a planeswalker or such. But that's all the cards revealed so far. We're going to have to wait till January 7th to essentially see the rest of the set. Nevertheless, I'm pretty excited to see what's going to happen within this Nordic-inspired metal realm. We shall see the shenanigans that it shall provide for the Brewing Labs. Nevertheless, I hope you all have a lovely day or night where you're at, and see you later. This is LevDev, signing out. Bada beep, bada boop.